Come election day, the future of tech, it won't be decided by Trump or Harris.
I've worked with the private sector my entire career. Even as vice president, working with some of the biggest banks and biggest tech companies.
Google's got a lot of power.
You would break them up, in other words.
I'd do something.
Since that's about the extent of their tech policies, there's a man behind the curtain.
My worst fears are that we, the field, the technology, the industry, cause significant harm to the world.
OpenAI and its CEO, Sam Altman, they're doing more behind the scenes than any candidate is saying in public.
We talked about the need for the U.S. to have a general policy about AI leadership.
At stake, powerful new technology in an increasingly AI-driven world that is impacting privacy, jobs, even national security. I'm Deirdre Bosa, and this week in tech, why the most powerful person in tech policy isn't in Washington, but right here in San Francisco. Washington loves Sam Altman.
This has been a tremendous hearing. Senators are noted for their short attention spans, but I've sat through this entire hearing and enjoyed every minute of it.
This has been one of the best hearings I've had this Congress.
Because over the past few years, Sam Altman has put on a masterclass in wooing lawmakers that are nervous about the impact of AI, especially after struggling to regulate the last big shift in tech, social media.
If this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong, and we want to be vocal about that. We want to work with the government to prevent that from happening.
It means that now they've begun embracing AI.
I put into my ChatGPT account, should Congress regulate AI, ChatGPT, and it gave me 4 pros, 4 cons. It was very balanced.
In a way they never did Mark Zuckerberg in social media. From the viral awkward moments.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
To the dramatic.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
And the hostile.
So let me be clear, you do no fact-checking on any ads, is that correct?
Altman's appearances have gone a lot more smoothly.
Mr. Altman, I think you grew up in St. Louis, if I'm
I did.
not mistaken. It's great to see a fellow
Missouri is a great place.
Missourian here. It is, thank you. I want that noted, especially underlined in the record. Missouri is a great place.
And we're better received.
Our hope is that the rest of the industry will follow the example that you and IBM, Ms. Montgomery, have set by coming today and meeting with us, as you have done privately, in helping to guide what we're going to do.
Experts say it's because OpenAI and the new crop of AI companies as a whole have learned from social media's missteps. Here's Katie Harbath, a consultant who used to be Facebook's public policy director.
When you look at OpenAI, I think that they're really learning from what companies that came before them, again, the Microsofts, the Googles, the Facebooks, what has worked well for them and what hasn't worked well for them. And they're trying to learn those lessons as they try to approach not just members of Congress in Washington, but also in the states.
One of the best examples is just how much faster Sam Altman has begun appearing on the Hill compared to past CEOs and companies. This chart from Harbath's Anchor Change spells it out. Facebook was founded in 2004. Zuckerberg didn't testify until 14 years later. It only took OpenAI half that time, and even fewer for new companies like Anthropic and TikTok. A clear sign they've carefully watched and learned from social media's high-profile blunders.
You have folks like Sam Altman that are trying to get ahead of the inevitable questions that are going to be coming, and so has been spending a lot of time on the Hill building those relationships with members of Congress, with their staff, to try to explain and bring some transparency into how OpenAI is thinking about these.
So this is probably a mistake on my part, but when I'm trying to look back, I do recall a lot of negative sentiment and connotations to Mark Zuckerberg's questioning from regulators. But I'm not really recalling any really bad things that happened to Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg that came out of it. I'm sure some changes happened, or maybe they got some fines, or maybe some regulation got added. But at least to my knowledge, basically Facebook struggling probably has more to do with like the introduction of like TikTok than anything the regulators did. And so I'm not really sure off the top of my head like what actually benefited society based off of those interactions. Obviously, there was all those viral moments, quote unquote, um, that occurred, and I'm sure for OpenAI, they're trying to do it as like a political and segment, obviously, since they're trying to regulators, but also like potentially like a marketing standpoint of like they're trying to get ahead of some of these issues, but it's unclear how they would actually be impacted. Maybe they're just worried about what regulation could go into it, and so they're trying to steer them away from certain regulation. And maybe this is to what they highlighted is maybe it's due to how things happened with social networks like and social media. So I guess maybe what I would interpret it as is regulation didn't really happen in social media. And maybe AI, especially because it's like a scarier connotation, especially because like Terminator and things exist. There's probably a lot more heightened fear as to the implications of AI versus like social media. That they're probably concerned that they're going to get regulated because this is like on the tail of so many mishaps with social media and like how it negatively impacts folks, how it can sway people's news and how they interpret politics, etc. And so this is something that they're probably trying to avoid getting regulated more so than them maybe welcoming it with open arms. But again, I'm not really recalling anything that really sizably negatively impacted like Facebook or Meta from those conversations other than like the marketing that happened and then the marketing spend they did afterwards to make folks forget about it.
Things trying to really shape the conversation very early on.
Not everything has changed, though. OpenAI, like tech companies before it, they want regulation, but they want it their way. In public, touting the need for AI safety nets.
I believe that companies like ours can partner with governments, including ensuring that the most powerful AI models adhere to a set of safety requirements, facilitating processes to develop and update safety measures, and examining opportunities for global coordination.
So it's interesting that he's highlighting the desire for regulation. I would actually be curious, because obviously like Sam Altman and these companies are doing this for a reason. Potentially a pessimistic view, but I would say one thing that immediately comes to mind is it's possible that he is trying to advocate for regulation here because regulation can be a barrier to entry for incumbents. And AI is such an easy space to get into because like literally anyone with some data and basically like some open source frameworks can just start building models that do things. Obviously, they're not going to be as good as like ChatGPT or something else that are the industry leaders at the moment. But there's nothing stopping somebody from coming in 2-3 years and beating them. Even Anthropic, as an example, is a company who's doing quite well, who started after OpenAI and is quickly catching up. And so arguably this would be the expectation. In the next 5 years, more and more AI companies are going to quickly catch up to the AI giants that we see today. And this might be a pessimistic view, but I would also be curious if this is sort of the spin that he's trying to make, which is if he helps lawmakers introduce barriers, then he can basically set up like this moat to create an advantage that he has over other folks in the market because there isn't really an inherent barrier to entry for AI at this moment in time.
Behind the scenes, opposing one of the only pieces of legislation to actually gain traction.
OpenAI, the latest to oppose a new California bill that would add safety precautions to increasingly powerful models.
That sweeping AI bill, that would have been one of the first moves towards real oversight of the nation's most dynamic new technology. But it was opposed by some of the biggest players in the industry, including Altman. That and other drama surrounding the influential founder has led some critics to call him untrustworthy.
What do you think of OpenAI? Do you trust Sam Altman?
Not a bit.
Others say the devil is in the details.
It doesn't mean they have to be for all types of regulation, because there is bad regulation. There is regulation that will have unintended consequences that people might not realize.
Regulation will continue to be debated and negotiated in the months and the years ahead.
That makes sense. So this is actually on the lens of he is becoming friends with the regulators so that he can basically put his like thumb on the scale for which regulations get made. That also makes sense. I would assume as a CEO, you must have some ulterior motive. Like inherently the government should be pushing for what's best for citizens, in my opinion. And some of that does include facilitating economies and companies and allowing them to thrive. But also, companies are solely focused in on profit margins. And there's a lot of things that are inherently bad about just purely focusing on how much money you as a single entity can make. Because obviously that's to the detriment of basically everybody else. That's potentially to the detriment of your customers, potentially to the detriment of competition or other innovation. And that's where the government should step in. So if you're working with the government, you must have some ulterior motive in my mind if you're a company. Otherwise, why wouldn't you just let them do what they're going to do regardless? So that makes sense. So I think that's what they're highlighting now, which is Sam Altman is interacting with them so that when regulation occurs, he can sway it to what is advantageous towards him and his company.
Meanwhile, OpenAI's messaging is clear. In the AI arms race, America needs to lead. And this time, lawmakers are buying in.
Initially, AI and ChatGPT kind of came onto the scene. There was a lot of fear and panic, right, about what AI might do in the world, the negative impacts that it might have. And you're starting to see that get pulled back some, particularly when you look at some of the legislation in California, for instance, that Newsom ended up vetoing. Part of that was because of pressure from, federal members of Congress and stuff like that, because they were worried about how it might impact innovation. People are worried about making sure we can stay competitive with China.
Facebook and Google taught a new generation of tech companies how important it is to get their spin right before the public narrative has been set. But what could be the biggest lesson taken from social media? Getting the right people on their side.
So again, they keep saying the public narrative. And to me, that seems to be enforcing the fact that, basically, if anything came out of those regulation conversations with Mark Zuckerberg or others, is that I feel like people just trusted them less as individuals and as companies. But I don't think that there was actual weight around it. But again, I could be wrong on this. I didn't follow those trials too closely. If you believe that there was actually some negative impact that the government actually pushed onto Meta or Facebook through this, that was actually a big portion or a big negative consequence to them in relation to everything else they do, not just a slap on the wrists, please post it in the comments. I'd love to hear what it is.
Lobbyists who have decades or more worth of experience building relationships in Washington.
OpenAI might be new. The people they're employing to go and be on their government relations teams have been doing this for quite some time and have deep relationships with people in Congress working on tech issues. Sam and OpenAI are in a pretty good spot when it comes to both Congress and the administration, no matter who actually wins.
No matter who wins, that's key. Because Trump and Harris's tech policies, or lack thereof, it means Sam Altman is in position to shape them.
You've been enormously helpful in focusing us and illuminating some of these questions and performed a great service by being here.
He wields soft power with lawmakers backed up by hard power, leading the most valuable AI startup in the world. It used to be that lobbying was the domain of big tobacco and oil giants. But as tech's influence and reach has grown, so has its lobbying dollars. And now artificial intelligence is supercharging those efforts. In just the first quarter of 2024, the number of groups lobbying on AI issues surpassed the entire number for all of 2023. According to data from Open Secrets, a nonprofit that tracks and publishes data on campaign finance and lobbying. Among the most active, OpenAI. The startup spent more than 2 other California-based AI companies in the latest quarter. Part of that may have to do with who Sam Altman has brought on to shape OpenAI's strategy in Washington.
Chris Lehane, Vice President, Global Affairs, OpenAI.
Lehane was a political strategist in the Clinton White House before moving west to advise tech companies like Airbnb. His deep Washington connections and experience navigating complex policy environments, that has enabled him to bridge Silicon Valley interests with government policy. He's now leading OpenAI's efforts.
Imagine if you could have been in Thomas Edison's lab, right? You got Nikola Tesla there, you got Edison, and you're building or at least seeing electricity being built.
And while Sam Altman can work the charm offensive in Congress, Lehane can be more aggressive behind the scenes.
Sam might be doing the more softer, like soft diplomacy side and like look at all the great things that OpenAI is bringing and like trying to be like the good cop. Chris has a reputation of playing the bad cop component of this, of like kind of scorching the earth. Like, we are going to spend a lot of money and we're going to attack you as members of Congress. If we think you're going to be anti our positions, we're going to make it basically make your life, kind of difficult unless you like are following along with what we want to do.
During his more than 7 years at Airbnb, Lehane skillfully navigated regulatory challenges and shaped policy discussions. His efforts helped legalize and legitimize Airbnb's operations in key markets while also providing tax dollars for local governments. Now at OpenAI, his message to policymakers is bigger, the stakes larger.
This is technology where we need to almost think about it at the scale of a New Deal, not the same types of infrastructure, but thinking about infrastructure as destiny, right? What the New Deal really did is put the U.S. in the position for the 20th century to become a democracy century. And as we think about AI at this particular moment that we're in, that infrastructure has the ability to help reindustrialize the country.
Lehane says that if the U.S. doesn't lead the way in AI, an autocratic nation like China will.
We are in this contest between China and the U.S. to build AI, and that's democratic AI versus autocratic AI. And so there clearly are really significant national security implications for this. China's head has talked about the idea that they want to be the dominant player in AI by 2030. Vladimir Putin, who I would typically never ever quote, has said that whoever wins AI wins the world. And so the stakes here are enormous.
Well, certainly he's doing a good job of making a big deal out of this. I'm not really sure what the difference between a democratic versus autocratic AI would be. I'm not really sure what type of rhetoric he's trying to make here that is what it's trying to inspire. Though this language probably does work on politicians since they're obviously worried about their own interests and us as a country. This seems to like him back of like, a tool is a tool. How it's used is going to change depending on whose hand that tool is in. And sometimes that tool can be used for good and sometimes it can be used for harm. But I'm not really sure what he means by democratic versus autocratic AI, of like how they would be functionally different. Like there's a scientific backing of how AI works and engineering practice of being able to leverage it for a variety of purposes. There's not a democratic portion of it or an autocratic portion of it. There's just the usage of it and which models you choose to make or choose not to make. And so I'm not really sure what he's trying to imply here. And I also don't see how like one AI to rule them all. I guess maybe he is trying to inspire things of like Terminator or something like that as being a problem. Many models exist out in the world. Like I would assume thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands, maybe. They're pretty easy to make, maybe even millions at this point in time. And so sometimes even what we consider one model could be many, like ChatGPT, for instance, is likely made up of many ones, probably more than I think. There's probably one for understanding human language, breaking apart sentences and words to understand like the gist of that information. There's probably like AI models built in order to like process information, maybe even like OCR, which is a way of basically converting images to text. So like if you take a PDF, for instance, a human can read it because we visibly see it the same way, but it's not the same for a computer. And then the way to like answer questions or the meaning of a question, and then how you're going to formulate an answer. And so ChatGPT might be dozens of models. And so again, I'm not entirely sure what type of rhetoric or what he's trying to come across here, just given how obviously politically charged some of these statements seem to be, and that they seem to be more like instigating concern or fear-mongering, more so than like them actually having any tangential meaning behind them or concrete meaning behind them.
And for the U.S., which is currently leading, but that lead is not guaranteed, but for the U.S. to continue to lead in AI and therefore help ensure that it's actually built with democratic values, democratic principles, drives democratic benefits.
Lehane and OpenAI's message is bipartisan and straightforward, one that any politician interested in national security and who opposes China and Russia can get behind.
A policy about China should be in making sure the United States of America wins the competition for the 21st century.
What they have given to China is unbelievable, but we're not going to let that.
It also works to OpenAI's benefit. The startup needs compute power, which requires vast amounts of infrastructure and energy for the next technological breakthroughs.
OpenAI just announcing an improved model, their AI model. They say it has better reasoning.
Amazon Web Services is announcing that it's investing more than $500 million in nuclear energy across 3 different projects as it seeks carbon-free power for generative AI.
Google, speaking of, is the latest tech giant to go nuclear to meet power needs for data centers and AI.
In a race that is moving extremely fast. Artificial intelligence has been an object of fascination for decades in our imaginations.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's no longer imaginary, and at these early stages, it's the people building the technology who have the power. Just like in the early stages of social media, lawmakers, they don't yet have a handle on AI. The stakes, meanwhile, are only growing as AI's impact touches more and more of our everyday lives. The chatbots in our browsers, robotaxis in the streets, misinformation in our news feeds, disrupting Hollywood, reshaping entire industries like energy and healthcare. These technologies, they're finally here, but they're still in the cradle. And we may look back on AI as one of the most important issues of 2024. For now, the power behind AI policy isn't on the campaign trail. It's in the hands of Sam Altman and Silicon Valley.
Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.